I'm tired. I'm tired of speaking and having my voice not be heard. I'm tired of fighting for justice and morality. I'm tired of observing my fellow brothers and sisters voluntarily give up their humanity and become apathetic. I'm tired of seeing people fail to exercise their brains and just believe whatever false narratives are being forced down our throats like geese being prepared for foie gras. But most of all, I'm tired of seeing good people's lives destroyed and humanity not responding to help them. I'm tired of witnessing the 0.1% parasitic ruling class winning their war against us. One of my patrons recently asked me what will happen to gold's price if World War III commences, because he or she has been told that whenever the ruling class needs to protect their wealth, they will take the world to war, which is a reasonable response from an observation in history. But my response would be that World War III has already started, and it is the 0.1% parasitic ruling class against the 99.9% of the rest of us. The war being waged is a totalitarian, brutal economic lockdown response to a non-dangerous strain of the flu, which I will discuss in more detail in podcast number 134. What people don't realize is that every single year of our lives, novel strains of coronavirus and the flu appear every year due to something called antigenic drift, and can even mutate within a single flu season. And that is why people sometimes contract the flu more than once in a year, and why scientists know that an efficient coronavirus vaccine may never be developed. But the 99.9% of us need to reconnect with our humanity again, because it is only total discarding of our humanity that has allowed these lockdowns to persist for the near entirety of this year. Do you know what 0.1% of the population that is doing this to us is? It is 7.8 million people. Do you really believe 7.8 million people have the power to strip 7,792,200,000 of us of our freedom so easily without our own participation in this hostage taker scenario, in which we, the 99.9%, outnumber the parasites by nearly 1,000 to 1. Even if that one had an M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, how many of the 1,000 of us could be mowed down before 1,000 of us overwhelmed him? And wouldn't that sacrifice be worth your freedom? Wouldn't that be worth returning to how we finally remember our days of freedom in 2019? There are two things sorely lacking in society around the world today. One is humanity. Two is belief in our own great power that resides in every one of us. The fight against the 0.1% becomes a lot less scary if 1,000 of us are willing to fight versus only 5 of us. If only 5 of us fight, yes, guess what? That one with the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun will murder us all. But if 1,000 of us fight against that one, guess what? We are 100% guaranteed to win. There is power and strength in numbers, and we must once again realize this. I was going to say we must never forget that, but we have already forgotten that. So we must return and get in touch with our humanity again and remember our power. Even for those that have never been in touch with your warrior spirit ever before. For those of us that have exercised it in the past, we must convince those on the fence to come join us. Some may never come along because they're not cut out for it, and that's fine. But for those of us that are, we must show our true colors now to everyone and lead the way to give that chance for that 5 to grow to 1,000, for that 1,000 to grow into 100,000, for that 100,000 to grow into 1,000,000, and for that 1,000,000 to eventually grow into 100 million. Chadwick Boseman was the only celebrity that I've discussed in my podcast. And for many that know me, they were surprised to hear me discuss the passing of a celebrity. But the reason I did so was because I knew he lived his life with purpose, even though I never met him and I did not know him. The first time I saw Chadwick Boseman in a movie was 42, where he portrayed Jackie Robinson's seminal breaking of the color barrier in American baseball. And the moment I saw him portray up on the big screen pain and suffering so well, and suffering with dignity and with grace so well, I knew immediately that Chadwick Boseman had been through a lot of pain and struggle in his own life, and for causes that he held dear to his heart, because you cannot portray that type of nobility up on the screen if you have not suffered great personal struggle yourself. How do I know this? Because when I was younger, I went to the Gene Shelton Acting School in San Francisco. And we had to engage in 5-minute, 10-minute monologues about pain and suffering. And I always found those much easier to execute successfully than something of a comedic nature. And I also knew when I went to see Hollywood movies and saw a young 20-something portray pain and suffering so miserably and so unconvincingly, that person had lived a very sheltered life up to that point and had never suffered any real pain and suffering in their own lives. Because you cannot portray that, even as an actor, if you have not gone through that. And then when I observed the rest of Mr. Boseman's roles that he selected, such as James Brown on Get On Up, such as Thurgood Marshall in Marshall, and even though Black Panther was a fictional character, he was a character that imbued all the characteristics you would want in a real friend, of self-reliance, dignity, nobility, great purpose, great ethics and morality, and not sacrificing one's morality for selfless greed and selfish greed, and for the selfless good of the greater community of humanity. And I would always say to Asian American actors that praised Crazy Rich Asians so widely, because that was the first all Asian cast in a major US studio film, I say we can learn a lot from the path and journey that Chadwick Boseman took, instead of glorifying hollowness, no purpose in life, the self-indulgent portrayal of material wealth and bragging of material wealth to others. That instead, we should concentrate on the types of stories that Mr. Boseman concentrated on, because there are Asian Americans that have stories. They may not be as famous as Jackie Robinson, but have stories of this intense struggle for civil rights, like Jackie Robinson, like Thurgood Marshall. And instead of producing a garbage film like Crazy Rich Asians with a garbage message, maybe we should think about portraying our strength and dignity to the world. Now, a lot of people in Western nations have been completely disconnected from the reality of the consequences of these economic lockdowns worldwide. But having lived in Asia for more than 15 years, I know loads of people whose entire livelihoods have been completely destroyed by these lockdowns, simply because they do not have the kind of jobs whereby working from home is an option, where it's just an inconvenience, or in some cases even preferred to going to work every day in the office. I have good friends, the most solid, good-hearted, salt of the earth type of people you would ever want to meet, whose financial lives have been completely destroyed by these lockdowns, because their livelihoods depend upon tourism, whether they had a job in the tourism industry or were a shareholder in a tourism related company, and they have not seen any income since this past March. And it bothers me to no end that the vast majority of us are so gullible and naive that we have willingly and voluntarily conceded to these inhumane mandates to shelter at home, to not work, to be fined thousands of euros in many EU nations if we don't comply and wear face masks, even though there's no scientific evidence that wearing face masks stops the spread of infection of this virus. Perhaps with the exception of Germany, in which reportedly millions of people this past weekend protested against these inhumane lockdowns. I observed a lot of people comment rest in power in response to Chadwick Boseman's passing, because Chadwick was a powerful human being. But what we have to realize is that type of power is inside all of us, not just him. What exhorted him to manifest his power was that he was in touch with his humanity, and he never lost it despite his own internal great struggles. He still visited other children that had cancer, even when he was dealing with his own cancer that was sapping him of his energy and of his dignity. If you lose your humanity, you lose your power. So if you never lose your humanity, your physical strength can be sapped from you through cancer, but you will always remain a powerful person. If you stop caring about other people's struggles because you haven't had real struggle brought to your doorstep because of these lockdowns, then you are losing your humanity and you are losing your power. The people that inspired me to make this message are seriously struggling far more than myself. And it's breaking my heart that good-hearted people out there are doing nothing to help them. And I don't mean directly helping them, but I mean fighting this injustice that is going on in the form of these economic lockdowns. Because if we in humanity rose up, the 7.792 billion of us that have the power to do so, we could give power back to my friends that are being destroyed by these lockdowns. And these are people that are so good-hearted that if they only had one day of food left and you were hungry, they would give you half the food they had left. And it breaks my heart that no one is standing up for them, except maybe a few million in Germany. Where else are the people standing up for them? We see millions protest in Algeria and in Lebanon. But you know why they're protesting? Because they have already lost everything. It's not because they have the resources. They may remain powerful, as I said, because if you don't lose your humanity, you have your power. But guess what? Their power also comes from all of us standing in solidarity with all our brothers and sisters around the world. And that's how we give power to those protesters in Algeria, to those protesters in Lebanon, to change the course of their nation and eventually our world. And before I get into the specifics of how we are being sold a pandemic that is about 1/100th as dangerous as most of us are being fooled into believing, I want to talk about the role we are playing in destroying the lives of our brothers and sisters all over the world if we are not acting upon what our moral compass is telling us to do. For those of us with kids, kids learn from the behavior of their parents. Do you want your children to be unthinking, obedient wards of the state when they grow up? And I'm not saying that like literally, if they were given up to orphanage, I mean they will become wards of the state if we are teaching our kids to be unfeeling, apathetic robots to the plight and struggles of everyone else in the world that is not within the self-isolated bubbles that the 0.1 parasitic ruling class has formed around all our lives. Do you want your kids to not know what it is to live with purpose and meaning and struggle? Struggle needs to be embraced right now, not avoided, like it is a pandemic or plague. Struggle is never a plague. Struggle is a gift. And the insanity about our situation is that if we are willing to embrace struggle, if we are willing to do this since March, we would be freed right now from the dire financial struggles that hundreds of millions of us face. But we would rather face lockdowns and acquiesce to the 0.1% of the parasitic ruling class rather than embrace struggle to gain our freedoms, as if we have completely lost our moral compass, our way, our humanity. Many of us by now have completely forgotten about Lebanon. It is much more in our human nature to be more like Chadwick Boseman than to not be like him. We have forgotten what it is to be human because the ruling class has worked tirelessly to turn us into non-empathetic, selfish creatures. They have conditioned us in school classrooms to hate our classmates that get better grades than us. Why do you think we keep hearing stories from our friends of how depressed they are by what is going on right now? If what I'm telling you in this video is not 100% true, how could I predict back in April? And I will put the link to this video on this very channel that I released in April when these lockdowns were just getting started, that a major consequence of these lockdowns would be learned helplessness among the human population all around the world. And that's exactly what has happened. If you want to know what I mean by the fact that the parasites have even used the academic system to turn us against each other, to divide us. How many times do black kids in poor urban neighborhoods hear from their peers in school, you're not black if they do too well? Or how many Asian kids hear, hey, you're not really Asian, because they didn't do well in math or didn't do well in engineering. The seeds of racial discord are being spread by the parasitic ruling class in our schooling system. And then they deprogram empathy out of everyone, regardless of race, brown, black, yellow, red, white, to only care about, as an end goal of our schooling, and making as much money as possible by any means necessary. And if this is the goal of schooling, every university might as well make drug dealing 101 as a class and teach students how to cut and distribute cocaine efficiently, because if making as much money as possible is the only goal we are taught, then there's not much difference between drug dealing 101 and teaching the students to become a banker or a big pharma rep, because neither of those industries leave a positive imprint on society while people become filthy rich who are engaged in those industries. If you don't think schools are being used by the parasites to condition us to be apathetic towards the plight of the suffering and the struggling, just go to business school and you will find yourself surrounded by people that have a mentality of apathy. On my first day of business school, one of the administrators said they were going to open up a tech specialty program to a few more students. And one student immediately raised his hand and said, if you allow more students into this program I'm already in, won't that hurt my income prospects when I graduate? And these are the kinds of parasites school is programming young adults to become. But we only believe this because we are taught to abandon our humanity in school. We are taught to turn against our human nature, to cooperate with one another, to care about each other. It is unnatural to think like that student. That unnatural means of thinking was learned and was conditioned. In the end, we want to cooperate. We want to take care of those that are struggling, those in need. Every single hunter-gatherer tribe or group of people that have been isolated from the outside world and are completely self-reliant gravitate towards cooperation, not discord. Gravitate towards caring for one another, not harming one another. Gravitate towards empathy, not apathy. Do you really think if you were in Beirut right now and you saw a mother or father struggling to feed their kids, that if you were in a position to help them out, that you would not help them out just because their skin color is different than yours? Of course not. Of course not. But this is what school and media condition us to believe. When I went to business school, we had to complete projects in groups. And our professors literally told us that everyone in our group would receive the same grade, even if one or more people in our group did zero work. Because they said, and this is real life, there are free riders, parasites that do nothing in the real world, but yet piggyback on the hard work of others and reap the benefits. So this is why we are not going to punish people in your group that don't do anything. And I remember we turned in a paper because one girl in our group had never showed up. No one even knew her name. We just had the email addresses of everyone. So we did not even write her name on the group paper. We just wrote her email address. And to this day, I remember it was LPAT357 because, and that's what we just referred to her as LPAT, L-P-A-T, because no one knew her name. And our group was 5 people, but yet still 4 out of 5 people showed up because 4 out of 5 people were not willing to be a parasite and a free rider. And if 80% of the greater population was like my business school group and they cooperate, that's a large enough percentage for us to win the fight against the parasites. The real pandemic are the parasites that constitute 0.1% of the population. They are the true infection. They infect society with hatred. They sow discord in everyone's minds. They spread false narratives and ideals about education, politics, the monetary system, the legal system, through the media distribution systems they control. They tell us not to help each other. Look out for yourself. You're number one. But for modern civilization to function, think about the absurdity of those notions that I just reviewed. To function in modern civilization requires cooperation. We didn't engineer the cars we drive, unless you're an auto engineer. We didn't engineer the computers we use. And I say we, of course, some of you watching this will be among the group of people that have, but I mean, the vast majority of people didn't. We didn't grow the food we eat. And the vast majority of us contribute in a positive manner to the communities in which we live. But what do we hear all the time about what is the most important element of business and communities? Small businesses, right? We hear that all the time. Small businesses are the backbone of society and the lifeblood of our local communities. But who have the parasitic 0.1% targeted for absolute complete pillaging and destruction during this COVID economic lockdown? Small businesses. They know if they destroy the lifeblood of our communities, and small businesses are the lifeblood of our communities, then they can move on. After the complete destruction of small businesses, guess who they're coming for next? If you're not a small business owner, they're coming for you. Because even if you're an employee, they're coming for your mid-sized business. And eventually they will suck everyone dry. And that's why as the pillars of our communities, in terms of heart, integrity, compassion, even if We aren't a piece of the puzzle in these pillars, meaning a part of the small business networks. We must act to support them now. Their fight is our fight. And if we think we can survive by remaining isolated and not caring about the total destruction of small businesses happening in our communities, and I don't care in what country you live or you reside, this is happening in your country right now, then welcome. Your reality right now is going to become a permanent reality. We let them die, we die. All that we love about community, about interacting with others, will forever disappear from our lives. And we are better than that. So take up the fight. This fight is not just to support our way of life. It's to support the way of life for all 7.8 billion human beings outside of the 0.1% that reside on our planet. I don't know if this is true or not, but I recently heard a horrifying stat that every 40 seconds in America, a child is trafficked in the human sex trafficking trade. And right now, especially with dozens of people I know whose lives have been ruined by these economic shutdowns, propagated on fear and hatred, and not on science, not on compassion, not on love, not on humanity, the damage being done to human life is far greater in numbers than the damage perpetrated in the child sex trafficking trade. Not one person listening to this video would stand for a child being trafficked. And likely more than a few of you watching this right now would risk your life to save a child if you saw a child being kidnapped on the street and being snatched into some unmarked van. So how can we stand silently by and just watch the destruction of our communities being played out in plain sight right now? If we take the United Nations numbers that 260 million people are being pushed to the verge of starvation, or will be pushed to the verge of starvation by the end of this year. And conservatively, it would be 200 million people. And then we add an extra conservative number from the hundreds of millions of small businesses being destroyed. A number less than that. Let's just say 40 million additional lives will be permanently ruined from the destruction of small businesses worldwide, which is probably underestimating the real number by a factor of 5 or 6 or 7. But let's just say 40 million people's lives will be destroyed by this destruction of small businesses, added to the 260 million people being pushed to the verge of starvation. That's 300 million lives ruined in about 180 days of global economic lockdown. Now, if we expand that child sex trafficking stat from 40 seconds, child being trafficked every 40 seconds, to just one day, we arrive at a much more sobering stat of 2,160 children trafficked every single day in America. And while that certainly is horrific, if we take the statistics of human lives ruined from the economic lockdowns worldwide, the 300 million I just told you, that's probably underestimating the real number by hundreds of millions. This amounts to not 2,160 lives being ruined every day. It amounts to 1,667,520 lives being ruined every single day. That's stripping humans of the right to work, the right to feed one's family, the right to just exist. Do you know why little children in America pledge their allegiance to the flag of the United States? I was, forced to say this every day as a child in school. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America for which it stands, blah, 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 blah. And we recited that every single day instead of reciting the Declaration of Independence. Ask 100 Harvard graduates to recite the Declaration of Independence and you won't find one that can accurately recite the majority of it. Ask them to recite that pledge I just recited, and 99 out of 100 would probably be able to recite it correctly. So the reason the parasitic ruling class makes sure the Declaration of Independence is never recited daily by school children is because it opposes their vision to create a powerless class of people that they can lord over Because even more important to the parasitic ruling class than the destruction of our humanity is the destruction of our acknowledgement of the great power we wield in this world. They need to condition out of us the memory of our powerful ancestors, our powerful warriors, and reprogram us with memories of subservience. This is why I talk so much about the importance of raising powerful, not subservient children, and of instilling memories of power right now within them by your own behaviors, and not memories of blind obedience to morally repugnant directives. Because the collective consciousness of humanity right now is at stake, and it is being transformed for the worse right now. One more generation of our collective consciousness being programmed with memories of blind obedience, of subservience to draconian authorities and rule right now will completely wipe out our memories of power. The U.S. Declaration of Independence states, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Happiness. How many people would consider themselves free and happy right now? That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of us, the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem likely to affect their safety and happiness. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations I always forget how to pronounce that word. I think it's usurp, so it should be usurpations. Pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security, end quote. Now that's just a small portion of the Declaration of Independence, but it should be self-evident why no government in the world would want these words repeated by every child at the start of every school day, because every government has violated these words, and if children were brought up in academic systems on these words, every government would have a revolution on their hands today. For dozens of close friends of mine, their right to feed their families, to work, to earn a living, to put in the hard work that makes them happy, have been completely stripped of them for the past 6 months. And the U.S. Declaration of Independence tells them not that it is their right, but it is their duty to abolish such governments. But most Americans do not even know the words of their own Declaration of Independence that formed the very country in which they reside right now. And there are many circumstances stated in this document, that justify overthrowing certain state leaders around the world that are guilty of violating every single reason granted as a legitimate reason in this document of independence for citizens to overthrow their state leaders. For example, depriving citizens of the benefit of trial by jury is stated as a legitimate reason to overthrow your state leaders. Under the Patriot Act, President Bush destroyed this right when he deemed any citizen suspected of terrorism guilty before proven innocent could be detained indefinitely without the right to a lawyer or without a right to trial. President Obama extended this tyrannical declaration by suspending habeas corpus and deemed the assassination of U.S. citizens, even a child was murdered under President Obama without trial. He deemed that as just. And this is just one point out of many more made in the Declaration of Independence that many governments around the world have routinely violated, not just during these economic lockdowns, but in the lead up to these lockdowns. In fact, it was the repeated violations of all the basic tenets of liberty and freedom within this document that elicited zero pushback from their citizens, that gave them the bravado, the temerity, that emboldened them to believe they could extend restrictions on our freedoms with these mandated economic lockdowns and get away with it. And getting away with it, they are. So if you have a child and you preach to your child, be strong when your morals are being tested. Stand up for what is right. Speak out even if a million stand against you. If you are right, ask yourself, are you exhibiting the type of courage and providing the example of strength to your child right now that you want your child to exemplify as an adult? We are at a crossroads now, and collectively no dictator in this world would have retained their power if we collectively exercise the power we hold. We must make the decision right now, rise up in numbers and exert our power, or forever sentence our children to a life of slavery that is being cemented by the inaction of millions of good people, including, quite possibly, maybe even the one that stares back at you from the mirror every day. Are you the person you want your child to be? Ask yourself that. Are you the one, are you exhibiting the behavior that you want your child to exhibit when they grow up and become an adult? That simple question will ensure you that you behave properly in responding to what is ongoing in the world today. Okay, so that concludes part one. In part two, like I said, I'm going to explain why the statistics being used to enforce the second phase of these lockdowns hold no water from a factual and scientific basis, and prove to all of us that I could, if I were some tyrannical leader of some nation right now, repackage the common flu. Because the statistics, I'm going to go into part two, of mortality, of overall number of deaths every year, of overall number of infections, have far exceeded the stats being reported about coronavirus today. So I could repackage that, resell it, say it's COVID-29, a new novel strain of the flu, and I wouldn't be lying, because as I said, due to antigenic drift, the flu it mutates a little bit every year. And I can impose just as severe lockdowns are being imposed right now and get 100% of people to buy into it, if I had that power. And I also control mass media like the 0.1% parasitic class does. So please stay tuned for part two. And if you made it to the end, please do comment below about if you agree with the fact that our human nature is to cooperate with one another, to help one another. But what is happening right now with these economic lockdowns is there is a concerted effort by the parasitic ruling class to destroy our human nature, what we naturally gravitate towards. These types of behaviors that are being formed, that is increasing our inhumanity, is that even a word? Or is destroying our humanity and increasing our apathy, is not natural. So thanks so much for watching again. If you would like to support my content, you can do so. I'll put links below, but only, of course, support me if you're in a position to do so. Do not take your savings if you're currently struggling right now. Reserve them, hold them for helping yourself and your own family out. Thanks so much for watching. And as always, I send my blessings to each and every one of you. I hope you remain strong. And I hope you take to heart what I said in this video. Thanks so much again. Take care.